Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Starlit Stories podcast. I'm really excited to be here with Connor. And usually I share a little bit about my guests, like story, credentials, and whatnot. But we were just before I'd started recording talking about language, and Connor has reclaimed his Gaelic name. So I'd love you to introduce yourself, Connor, as a first on the Starlit Stories podcast.
Yeah, Míle buíochas, thanks a million. Conor Ruadh, sin is Anam Dom. So Connor in English, is my name. So yeah, a little bit about myself. I suppose definitely, I think one of the reasons how maybe I'm even here talking to you and where I am now really is around a return to language. I went to and we can touch on it later, but I made a decision a couple of when my first son was born to kind of raise him through Irish when really at the time it wasn't the forefront of my mind. Um, and that really actually changed the kind of course of my life, I think, without being too dramatic. That really was my kind of inspirado yeah, that kind of divine inspiration where that changed everything for me. And yeah, I kind of started. I was already kind of I'm a meditation teacher, and I my background's in psychology, and I'm a hypnotherapist, and I'm training now as I'm in a kind of the third year of a shamanic apprenticeship in on the lands of actually the UK. Um, but how I got into this was, yeah, it was through the Irish language. That really gave me a sense of belonging. And with all the positive aspects of that, I also realized some of the hang-ups a lot of people have then. Unbelievable kind of tangled web of shame and embarrassment and lack of confidence and hate and whatnot that comes with our native language. And that kind of started me on a path of like, why is this the case? And then into the idea of colonialism and the effects on native people, and that goes for around the world, kind of the same tactics and the same effects, and that really got me thinking into yeah how maybe our modern kind of psyches are definitely, of course, reeling from the effects of oppression, and that goes for all the islands of the Insular Celts, I suppose, uh, and that kind of has yeah, I've kind of followed that rabbit down that hole of colonialism and yeah, are our modern minds colonized. So we may not have, the rifle in our face anymore, but that we are still kind of living out aspects of the negative effects of colonialism. That's our, modern attitudes to, well, from my perspective, Irish language, I'm sure from your perspective, the Welsh, all things related to that, to your native culture. And you can see that now. And we'll touch on that deeper. But yeah, that's where a lot of my work comes around now, is maybe a little invitation to people to kind of make sense of maybe how they've gotten here. That's a lot of my workshops around exploring basically why we feel the way we do, and that's true. Basically, kind of going through the history of Ireland and other native people around the world, and what has occurred to get this point of, okay, that makes so much sense why we have these hang-ups and issues around it, because of all and actual um, processes, that they put in place, systems in place to absolutely break the spirit of the native people. Um, that's a very long-winded way of answering, but that's kind of where I'm at the moment and the kind of world I'm I'm living in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very similar world to what I'm living in. I think we've had a very, similar journey there. I didn't go to like a Welsh speaking school like you went to an Irish speaking school growing up. The
Mm.
Welsh language was sort of the second thing that you sort of had to do,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of shame around it. So my great grandparents, my great great grandparents were the last to speak it. Um, but they were also deaf and dumb and meant so I say it like that because my nana who's 96 says they're
Hmm.
deaf and dumb, but I know that's not the right terminology now, but I've just got my nana in my head, my parents, they were deaf and dumb, and
Yeah.
they meant in a mental they met in a mental health hospital, but they could speak Welsh. But for them it was like because they were deaf, it wasn't even full
Wow.
speaking. So my nana, she can't speak Welsh, and that was because of the colonial tactics that the Irish went through and people
Hmm.
across the world had gone through. And when I fully like reflected on why I don't speak the native language, for me that was a huge wake-up call. And I feel
Hmm.
it was the same for people that probably that weren't brought up with it when you talk to them about it. It's that a lot of people just don't question it. I just never questioned why. We were taught a little bit about the
Oh
punishments,
yeah, but you
but
definitely don't touch on it at all in school. It's just yeah, not at all of why. It's just yeah, it's the same in Ireland. We have that kind of where it's for a lot of people it's a second language and you have to do it. And then because of that, I kind of can unless your teacher's really good or you really can connect with them in some way. Most people end up a lot of people hating it, and that puts a massive block for people then. And as such, then they can be do years and years of Irish study and can't speak it, which is interesting. So very similar.
yeah, yes, yeah, the same here. We've got somewhere called St Fagans in South Wales, and it's a little bit. It was a natural history museum, and the only thing I remember was going to their school there and learning about the Welsh knot. And
Yes, yeah.
the way that we're taught about these things. So the way that I see, I don't know if it's the same over there, but we're taught about Welsh culture and language as a subject as opposed to an
Mm.
and not even just an identity, but a who you are. Like, and
Heritage, I suppose, yeah.
yeah, yeah, as a heritage, like it's something to be
Or a
as
living
outside.
heritage, yeah.
Yeah, it just is. I know people who went to Welsh speaking schools and their experiences of living heritage, whereas for us, if we had an English teacher that wasn't, they just had to talk about it. It just
Mm.
wasn't the same, and there's that disconnect there. But yeah, I haven't learned Welsh yet. Yeah, doing trio, tipping back. I'm trying a little
Nice.
bit. I'm sending my son to a Welsh speaking school though, so I
Oh,
know
amazing.
I've got it sorted out in, 5 years' time.
Yeah, yeah.
It's going to be, yeah, it's going to be great. Me and my partner and him, we're going to be all Welsh speaking. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to do that.
Mm.
Yeah, so your name then is interesting. Is you were just saying before we jumped on, it was quite a decolonial act to reclaim reclaim your name, and then also having it where people are going to read it on Instagram and be like,
Yeah.
"What?"
Yeah, yeah. I never. I suppose like when you start off as well, like when you're on social media, like I'm grateful now, and so is yourself as well. Your exposure starts to increase a bit. So no, like at the beginning, I'm not thinking of oh people in Australia or Canada or America. You're obviously just thinking of your own people, your own land. You're not really thinking too much big. And so yeah, I don't know when it was. There was just a little, I suppose, decolonial act to go. Okay, like if I'm speaking in Irish, I wouldn't say, Diagwit Ismisha Connor. I wouldn't say hello, my name's Connor. I would say in Irish, Crohor. That's how I would say it. And so that was the same idea. It was just at least to acknowledge this is my name in my native tongue. But like, yeah, I don't. Um, when I introduce myself to people in English, I would say Connor. So yeah, it's not something that has to be for some people. Not at all. It was just a little thing I did, but also important. And as we were touching on there, like names, yeah, your name has a power to it for sure. And especially, I never thought of it before, historically speaking, we were just talking about this earlier. There are figures in Irish history who, up to a couple of hundred years ago, obviously, would have been speaking Irish and only that. So they would never heard the English language, but when you read about them now, a lot of their names are translated into English. And I didn't really thought about that until someone, maybe some other book pointed out and said, like, that person, uh, probably never ever heard basically that name shouldn't be translated into English because that person would have no idea even what that name is. And it seems like a small thing, but that really resonated with me. Like, yeah, and there's a lot like that of just there's so many things as you say, you just kind of don't question. And I think that is the system at large, maybe it's society at large. But there are small little things, definitely got to do with our customs and culture that you kind of grow up on, and there's some positive, but a lot of it is apathy and indifference, or it feels exactly like a subject, or that's just the past, or that's super old folkloric superstition, etc., for our grandparents, and that's not something to connect with, and it takes a while to kind of detangle that a bit and go, oh, actually, no, that is relatable, or that actually makes a lot of sense, or yeah.
Yeah, like we're reclaiming our Welsh names for places,
Mm.
and people want to change the names. So our national parks now, they now have the Welsh names, the original
Nice.
names, which is great, but it wasn't easy, it's
Oh
not
yeah, of
not like
course,
the
never.
Welsh government or the Welsh council are just able to do it.
Yeah.
We still don't have as many yeah, as we're not in control as much as we should be over the land that is ours of the people who, speak the native tongue. Um, yeah, so in terms of So you've got a lot of podcasts out there. You've done interviews with people before, and a lot of them are on decolonialism and decolonizing the mind. And for you, spirituality and decolonialism is deeply tied into reclaiming your language. And you do a lot of singing and music in your native tongue. So what I wanted to go into was something a little bit different because I feel like that's something people can dive into, and you've really gone into that beautifully in some other podcasts. So I wanted to chat about something that's a little bit more mysterious.
Yeah, go for it.
Who are the she?
Yeah, so the she are what I suppose have different names, and in Ireland for sure are what would be. I think it's interesting. I would have had a certain idea around them, and especially this comes from basically the fairies. That's what they would have been known for, what people would think of. And in Ireland, that is definitely something that people are aware of. Like you would never meet an Irish person that would say, "Oh, I don't know what that is." They would always know whether they have a belief or a connection to it or know any stories. But everyone knows who and what they are. But I suppose that has kind of handed down through folklore and stories and what has, become literally fairy tales and whatnot. And again, more of a what stories from the old people. But what was really interesting to me, or I never thought of, because then, okay, another flip side of that is, okay, we have that designation of the she, or we would have different names as well for them because it would be some would have a belief that they're not quite fond of being called fairies or the she. So it would be like basically not to call them. Maybe they're sometimes a bit easily offended. So I think the idea of we would have Dini Maha, with the good people, or Nadini Biog, the little people, or Aguini Ushla, the kind of respected people, or distinguished men and women. So and that was, I suppose, there's an idea that Walt Disney probably hijacked where because I didn't know as well, Walt Disney was brought around, I think, I don't think I'm making this up now, where he was brought around the not the folklore collection in Ireland and got a lot of influence for an inspiration for, Darby O'Gill and the Little People. He took a lot from that. And I think he was quite moved by a lot of it, but obviously it became, he went with a certain idea. But that has shaped the minds, I said, or the ideas that most people have of definitely maybe from an American Irish context of what fairies are and leprechauns, etc. But that's only one aspect, and actually that, like in most of our stories, they are a lot of them have been sanitized recently. But actually, if you go back, kind of more to genuine stories, they are really not to be quite messed with. You would be cautious. I think especially now we were all like, oh yeah, in terms of maybe New Age spirituality of seeking these connections, calling on these powers, but that they were to be wary. A lot of old people had quite a lot of fear around. Maybe it's a reverence as well and respect, but that you really definitely didn't call on them lightly or want to interfere with them or interrupt them if they're in the middle of something because there's so many stories of late night shenanigans where you come across them and if you're not respectful or if you don't help them there can be dire consequences and many stories of people over the years that have died that they wronged them in some way, insulted them in some way, and that maybe isn't the idea that most people have. They think it's this lovely little cute thing or a leprechaun. And so I think there's a whole vast world out there of Nasheen and Nadini Maha. But what really inspired me or changed my outlook as well, and I know it did for you, was when I read, I think it was last year, was the fairy faith in Celtic countries. And that was really like it almost wasn't a new idea, but then the way he flipped it of okay, actually, what I thought of it as okay, maybe these fairies, Nashi, Nadini Maha are land spirits, and that's what we're connected to. And that maybe sounds obvious, but for some reason when I those two ideas joined, I went, oh wow. So again, same idea maybe with animistic traditions around the world. This is our spirits of the land. That makes sense? And they dwell in a lot of these sacred sites. And the same thing, you are, you're not like yes, all come on into the house and party. Like you'll be, yeah, wary of that and to be mindful and to be respectful and not to, um, yeah, invite them in without knowing what you're doing. It's the usual. Be careful what you wish for and what to pray for. But that book really clicked for me, and that was really interesting, even to hear the visionaries of and in all the different countries around, kind of the insular Britain of Ireland and Scotland and Wales and Isle of Man and Brittany. And I was over in Brittany at the time when I was reading the book, so that was really interesting. But I found that really that made it real for me in a way. Although, like I would have known these are not just fairy tales, but it kind of just there was a realize just a little slotting in of, okay, this is just saying it in a different way that made sense to me and made a connection to how other cultures around the world see local land spirits, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, that book is by Walter Evans Wentz, and
Yeah.
what he did was in the early 20th century, in like 1901,
Yeah.
I believe it was. He went around, so he was from America. He came over to study in Oxford University, and he went around Ireland, Scotland, Britain, Wales, Isle of Man, and he went to like the furthest out places to speak to the oldest people and asked them about their what they knew of the fairies and the folklore. So he was like asking people
Mm.
what their experiences were outside of like their opinions. It was
Yeah.
all accounts, which for me, I was like, oh, okay, I could feel the truth. I could feel the honesty through the accounts that were being shared. And I was like, okay,
And
there's
I loved as well that even,
wow.
or sometimes a lot of them would say, you know, look, this isn't for me, but my mother always told, or my uncle swears by this. And they're like, you do what you think with this story, but that's,
Yeah, or like Mr. Or I heard a story of Mr. Mr. John,
yes, yeah,
who
yeah,
was
yeah,
like
yeah,
the uncle of Billy up the road, and he had this thing, and then and then so this also happened in this same area, and some of the stories are quite, frightening. They're bloody
Absolutely, and
terrifying.
that's what I mean. If you go back, there's a great storyteller in Ireland called Eddie Lenihan, and he has a little podcast. But he's an old he. If you were to look him up, he literally looks like just what you would envision a like a wizard or some king of the fairies. He has this big white beard and this quite strong country accent, and he talks about how he went around in the 60s and started gathering stories from the old people and recording them all, and now he shares those stories with people. But he says he was like these, yeah, again, these are scary stories. It's like really gore. Like there's no joke here. Everything's been quite sanitized now. So yeah, it's amazing. And but what I loved as well, even from that book, was this idea that there actually are as connections here, or the same kind of experiences happen to people in Ireland or in Wales or in Scotland, in Brittany, almost identical. And when I read that, this book is written, as you say, 120 years ago. There was no way within reason that they were connecting the dots there or interacting that actually the spirits were of that area had the same kind of customs of you cannot do that here. You can do this, but you can't do that. I thought that was amazing. I think there's a little story of I know in Ireland of because I know of you know a man comes across a late at night coming home from the pub and walks across a fairy fort and then sees these beings dancing away and hears them singing this song of De Lune, De Mart, De Lune, De Mart. And it's Monday, Tuesday, and anyway, he kind of finish it and they kind of notice him and put a threat on him like, do you have anything to add? And he kind of says, De Mart is decading, like Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and they're all delighted and think this is great. And he gets a reward and he's honored for that. But that same story, and then someone else comes along, hears a story, wants a reward, insults them and of course gets punished. But that story was the same in definitely in Brittany, almost an exact. And then um, I can't even remember was it Wales or Scotland that had the exact same story of Monday, Tuesday. They're all singing the same song, and that blew my mind.
Yeah, what that brings me to is I believe that these spirits that they traverse, and we know they do actually, I mean, they appear around stones and springs. I
Mm,
believe that they traverse the aquifers and the waterways as
mm,
portals, because like here in Wales anyway, a lot of the stories are to do with the other world or Annwn. The entrances are within the waters.
yeah,
And this actually goes across the world. I've got a friend, Isabel, who does a lot of sacred water work over in Mexico. And over there, she says they go to the cenotes and they go to the springs. And she says if you for her, she will meditate and like allow herself, in a sense, like allow her consciousness to go into the waters and commune with the water spirits there.
wow.
And when she told me that, I was like, oh, wow. Like here, they say that the portals are these water entrances to deep into the earth, right? So perhaps, we're like, oh my God, they're so far away. That's happening in Britain.
Yeah, yeah,
This is
very true.
happening in Ireland. This is happening in Wales. But for them, because they exist in like a different sort of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
space time in a sense. They're like popping from one place to the other, and they're like, oh, just going to go over to Brittany to get to do
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but we have our own names for what could be argued the same spirit itself. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's just, my theory. I'm not sure, but it's the only thing that it's a way of making sense of
Mm,
how on earth is that happening 120 years ago? You know?
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, yeah, with the she, what sort of like what sort of areas, like what, I guess, like on the land, where do they appear?
Well, yeah, we are told that again. It goes back to one of our kind of almost origin stories that there was a big battle. They would have been from the race of what is called. This is what the two of the Donnan. So these are like the tribe or people of Danu, the goddess Danu, and they were quite a mythological race, and that they came from the north. Again, a lot of our it's interesting in Ireland. We have no creation story in Ireland. We just have a book of invasions, basically, on Lower Gabala, which is the book of invasions, and the two of the Donna weren't the first to be here actually, but they came from the north, they say, and and were kind of masters of magic and knowledge and that kind of um, craftsmanship. But they had a battle and won over, I think, the Fomorians, which would have been quite more of a lower level, base level, greedy, selfish kind of race. And they inhabited Ireland for a while, the two of them, and then later on, they lost to the Malaysians, which they said would be our relations to the Gaels, our ancestors, and they kind of agreed. You can have both sides of. I think the story goes that they went, look, we've lost. Look, you can have we'll split our the land into two, and they went, okay, fine, we'll have the top and you have the bottom, but underground. So they kind of got a big trick there. So anyway, they say in the She or the fairies dwell underground. In a lot of She, which actually is what we have a word for a mound. So even these mounds or cairns in different places are the actual word She actually means a mound as well. So that's what they would say. Traditionally, a lot of them would dwell in a lot of these sacred places of Brunaboyne and Newgrange nearly every county in Ireland would have and ring forts, or cairns or rats that would be called or lists are these places that would have been known the kind of stone circle or something, but even something that wouldn't be just like some massive stone cairn, it would just be a fairy ring. It could be every town in Ireland would have some sort of story of a place, maybe a little bit outside of town, that would be just to be mindful of that. That's where fairies would dwell. And I don't know about in Wales, we have an amazing collection. I actually would recommend anyone, even around the world, to check it out. It's called Dúchais, Duchas, and this is a website where the National Folklore Collection is on, and you can look up. You can literally type them in, basically in the 1930s, the kind of national school system went around, the Folklore Commission went around and collected stories from children in school. Basically went, do you have any story from the local area? Could be from ailments to cures to stories of ghosts and all sorts. And they wrote them down. And so you can see the children's lovely handwriting. And then some of them are just in Irish and they translated them. But every town has then different stories or the same stories of your stories with the she and different stuff and places or a certain place. And it's amazing to see that. So that's usually where they would dwell. And in the same thing, maybe at springs or holy wells. Wells would be, I think Ireland has the most concentrated amount of, I think, 3,000 wells, the most in the whole entire world, which is mind blowing. Um, so that a lot of those places. Definitely nature. Look, we know that obviously in nature is where a lot of, we can have the big, obviously spirits are everywhere, but our biggest connection can be, and even for us to charge up, we get energy from nature. But yeah, any of the mounds, sacred sites, wells, and then just kind of ring forts where people would know, maybe it's depending on different ones, but yeah. That's kind of traditionally where it would be known that they dwell, but we have the belief that they're always around us, but beneath they dwell underground.
Yeah. The first thing I want to touch on is the calling the mounds she. So in some of
Yeah,
our medieval, like early medieval bardic poetry, we reference the Welsh bards reference these mounds as she. We literally
yeah,
use that word. We've got Kaya she, and in reference to also like celestial and cosmic like observatories, like which obviously like they are if you look at like how they align with
yes, absolutely.
the lunar and yeah, the solar cycles. But what's interesting is how we were using that word to describe it because if they are, similar things or the same thing. And the other thing I wanted to touch on was they give when we go out into nature and we work with these with not even these beings like but these places which they work with these places because they have a specific power that is aligned with like the stars.
Hmm.
um we we ourselves, as you said, can fill ourselves up. And with for me with decolonialism and decolonizing my mind and my spirit is opening up to like to being able to harness that and like what's really happened there where these have become fairy tales and we've
Hmm.
been warned against
Yeah.
um through Christianity, we've been warned against going to them and seeking anything outside of ourselves, let alone in nature in the woods.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then today that's sort of transformed into, well, you're an absolute idiot and you are schizophrenic if you
Mm.
were to sort of like entertain these ideas. Um, there's that severing there, and that's caused us to forget our power, like,
Yeah.
and the power that we share with the natural world. Really, for me, these things have gone hand in hand. And I know that there are a lot of people who do colonial work where it's just sort of with, perhaps just psychology, or there's like
Absolutely.
so many
Yeah.
different branches, and they're
Intellectualism. Yeah.
also,
Yeah.
yeah, intellectualism, and they're also relevant. But for me, it's really gone hand in hand with this remembering of our power as human beings, and how essential I think that is actually for our time, but without wanting to sort of force people to have certain beliefs, or like I don't want to
Of
force my
course.
spiritual beliefs onto people, but I do think there is, and this is what Indigenous peoples teach us from around the world actually, it is needed. This like
Yeah.
spiritual and non-intellectual way of relating to the earth is actually like quite essential for humanity as a whole. And I think like conversations like this that we're having, it's like, yeah, like stepping into like it is real and like, but there's a fear, like coming back to the shame and the fear of like saying it. There's like I mean, I talk a lot about it online and I don't mind, but there are
Mm.
some things that, I wouldn't say to certain people because of looks or,
Course.
and
Yeah. And
it,
I think you do have to have discernment as well. Yeah. You're not going to pour.
yeah,
I think I've learned that as well, maybe because you can be vulnerable or you can get excited and want to share and then someone completely shuts you down and it can kind of hurt a bit. So yeah, yeah, I think you have to be without being fearful of never sharing. But yeah, you're right. You have to be mindful of who you're talking to, read the room, I suppose. But yeah, like it's just like that has definitely, if we think of it now, even the idea of nature and like, look, it's universal. Obviously, we've studies after studies now of obviously the benefits of nature, but that kind of connection, like we are of nature as well. Obviously, we've gotten used to the sanitized version of, sitting in my house, in my room, on my phone, that we've kind of lost. We are a disconnected society, aren't we? We are quite a disembodied society where definitely to our bodies and whatnot. I suppose we've worshipped the altar of the intellect for a long time now. So anything other than that does sound a bit weird and odd to people, but everyone within reason, without forcing any opinions of people, if you go out for a walk or you go out and just take a bit of time to disconnect from one thing and maybe reconnect to something else, you do feel the benefit of it, and everyone can say that. But like that's what we've been told, I suppose, even historically and this would have been definitely in Wales and Scotland and the land of England, and definitely here with our Druids that like places of nature would have been our church, places of worship that would have been, they sometimes say about certain groves, a certain tree, like an oak forest or a yew or whatnot, or again by a spring or something. These were places of worship that people went to, and some of them were more organized than that, maybe. And obviously, then when the church or the establishment came in, they would have thought that's why a lot of those places maybe were chosen. But a church was built there to come in from nature into this building, um, and that's where we even get like the idea of like nature like has to be revered and respected, but maybe not to be completely feared because you see it in, like where do you think the idea of like don't go into the woods comes from? Like and every if you think about even every it was coming to mind now, every horror film, scary film, a lot of them are got to do with the woods, the darkness, what the evil that resides in there. That has to come, I think, whether the movie maker knows it or not. That mindset definitely comes from that could easily come from the church and that wanting that control of to separate. You don't want to go out there. Wild animals are out there; they're going to kill you. which there was a grain of truth in that, of course. Um, but I think it's interesting that it rings in my head that don't go into the woods. Like that's dangerous place. So basically, never go there. When it's like, okay, let's maybe be mindful of maybe we can go with certain conditions there. Yeah, it's interesting. That's another thing to just maybe a little, colonial mindset of and that separation from the land. That land is to be conquered and dominated and to be used rather than revered and maybe to have a active relationship with, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like yeah, just going out for a walk in the woods, how beneficial that is to our mental health. Like, yeah, the power that we can sort of receive is like it's actually so powerful, like to feel good in a society
Yeah.
where so many people are so depressed. Like, I was just talking about like how much power we can receive going into these sacred spaces, and we can go and do like a drum circle and,
Mm.
activate a sacred space and have like a, a mystical experience. But what the world really needs is that simple just being with the elements, and as you said, we've got all of the scientific studies that are proving this. It's not changing people. Um, Again, the intellect is trying to
Yeah.
fix a problem that was caused, by the intellect. And there's a lot of like, yeah, deprogramming with all of the horror films that we've watched are going into the woods and being afraid of being
Yeah.
in the woods and um, yes, that's very, very true. So with your you come down to Britain, you come down to Sussex a few
Mm.
times a year to you're studying shamanism, and which lineage is that from?
So it's interesting. What they're trying to do is, I know Jez, my teacher, is the kind of organization is called Second Sight Healing. So it's on English land. So their idea is that they're taking inspiration from native cultures, but without appropriating anything, So, which I never really heard of was kind of like a revival movement. So this is kind of like kind of a tradition you'll see now of kind of a recreation of an ancient lineage that may have been entirely lost for centuries or millennia. And I think a lot of us you can go for Wales and in Scotland and in England as well and in Ireland where, you know, we don't know we have little bits from here and there and from different sources where we know they definitely did this, they didn't do that. And I think it's taken from, um, usually the revival tradition is imitating ancient traditions as closely as possible from what is known, whilst making it relevant to modern times. So you would be kind of we're closely studying the traditions of their own land and their own ancestors while taking inspiration. So I know my teacher, they've had a connection maybe for the last 10 years of working with the Radica people in Mexico. So they would go over and do pilgrimage there, and I think they come over. But they're an unbroken lineage where they have been doing the same ceremonies, same rituals for thousands of years, which you can imagine the power that resides in that. So they definitely get a lot of inspiration from that, but without copying, if that makes sense. So I think it's re-remembering, and that can be true actual study or find out this is what we did. And then even here in Ireland, like this kind of thing of maybe starting to connect with the land and go, okay, something that came true, like I feel like, and I know Jez, my teacher, British he feel and revive. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you froze. I just realized my mute was like, yeah, you froze. It was you want to talk about Jazz's opinion, I believe.
Yes, I'll put my phone on because I think something happened there. Someone rang me and then it somehow cut off. So I'll put on Do Not Disturb. Um, I can't remember where I was
Yeah, you
at.
were saying about
But
your
yeah,
situation. It's not copy. Yeah, it's not copying. It's inspiration. Inspiring.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
what?
I think it's because obviously we see a lot, and definitely in terms of shamanism, of there can be direct copying or this what they did or taken from North American traditions, and and even there's an argument for what is shamanism. There's only certain um traditions. I know like Mongolian one that would be shamanic. But obviously our kind of anthropologists have put the term now shamanic as all these societies that kind of work within these kind of spirit traditions. But I suppose it goes back to we're starting to remember, reconnect to animistic traditions
Yeah.
on our land, um, and how that relates to it in terms of again the spirits we may work with. So I even sometimes think a nice way is, if like people say, oh, I'm connected to the spirit of a jaguar or something, which that's lovely. But sometimes maybe the argument could be, I wonder how the fox down the road feels about that, or the badger, or the owl, or not that you can't, of course, connect to something but does that make sense? That sometimes
Yeah,
it's definitely
it's like connecting to the beings within the
local
ecosystem.
environment. I know he said
Yeah.
that big time was connect. So we're working with the local land and environment. Doesn't mean obviously, of course, you can take inspiration here and there. Absolutely, that's what we're doing because we have lost a lot, but without absolutely just direct copying because it won't have any power behind it. But it's possible to also to dream into, you know, what you may think might happen, and also we're coming back into making it relevant to modern times, if that makes sense. So that's a lot of what's on my course is basically learning second sight and working with our with a lot of the last first 2 years were really around rites of passage and initiation. So that was literally going through maybe once every weekend for the first 2 years of basically kind of dismantling us before we put us back together. So there's a lot of quite hard initiations to kind of and look, we see this all over the world. The idea of initiations, of rites of passage, are to for men and women to kind of push you to the edge. It's usually quite hard on the physical body, in order to, like most Eastern traditions say, in order to transcend the body. Um, if that makes sense. So a lot of it is starting to,
Mm.
and I know he says it before. Sometimes that exhaustion point is where spirit then comes out. That point of I can't do this anymore. I can't do this any longer can be the exact time the spirit comes in. Okay, we'll come in and power you up. And
Yeah, and that's not something because it is such a powerful transformation that's life-changing. It's not something I think you just want to try out, like try this new thing out, see how it
absolutely,
goes. It's like we want to be learning from traditions and lineages who have had this initiation process for like thousands of years. And like
yeah,
how can you teach us? Because if we started all from the beginning, like and just try and like guesswork, it's like, it's a serious matter. There are people out there who can guide us. Um, yeah, so wow, okay. So I want to ask about the drum just quickly because the I have a drum, and I'm looking forward to birthing my own drum. We have no evidence to suggest that we used drums in Wales, in the ancient world, but I'm pretty sure we did. They were just probably destroyed along with our
absolutely.
books and our lore and our, like the Irish lineage, and your lore is a lot is unbroken in many ways. In terms of like you can still study it, like the things are still there to look at even though it might not be something that's as ingrained into your society, like
Yeah, absolutely.
but it's unbroken in comparison to here. We don't really have that. So I've had people and other friends I know who are quite popular online have had people share like you shouldn't be using a drum in this way, and there's no evidence
Yeah,
to
it's
suggest that
tricky.
you should use a drum in that way. And I found something really interesting the other day. You know, Paul Stamets, I believe that's his name, the mushroom guy. He's got the
Hmm.
glasses and he's
Yeah, I know him to see probably. Yeah.
brilliant fungi researcher. He spends a lot of time with all different types of mushrooms, from the magic to the lion's mane and all of this. He's
Hmm.
phenomenal. I saw him talk the other day about how when he was saying that he'd never heard anyone say this before, and it's just come to him that when you bang a drum and or when you stamp your feet, so when we stamp our feet and when we walk over the ground, the mycelial network sends pulses to the trees. And he was talking about how he thinks that the like that's like a sort of a communication and it's happening through the mycelial network pulsing through the trees, which is why we get guided to do that. And it's this like communication and conversation we're having, which really brought me to well, the mycelial network and the trees and our ability to drum and my heartbeat and how we're just guided to move in rhythm as human beings. It isn't like strictly for one culture. So Yeah, like, and you've got the Boran drum. I love working like, so I'm really into like electronic music, and I used to rap over drum and bass. So I love playing the drum in like different ways.
Hmm.
And I got a tipper, is it?
Yeah, yeah.
A tipper, and I'm gonna learn, like, I'm sort of trying to figure out how to use it, but I want to get a Boran drum as well and learn how to play that. Um, is there any is there any spiritual significance to the Boran drum, or is it like, from what I understand, there isn't. It's actually just purely a percussion instrument. But
Yeah, like so I think like yeah, they would say like there's two strands to this. Definitely the modern idea is actually the Bowen isn't that old. And I kind of thought as well, oh, it must be ancient. I think it's really not that old, where it's we're talking 100, 200 years, not even. And that so not really, no, you can probably romanticize the idea of it. But yeah, that creation of the playing it with sessions is it was just an instrument. Um, however, I think they have found it depends on how you view it because I think they have found what looks to be literally exactly a Bowron drum that are preserved and whatnot, but that would have been said they were used for oaths and like for carrying stuff like that. So we definitely have evidence. So, but it depends on we can't say for definite, but I'd say it could be a good shout that also it may have also had more than one use. It was a practical use of So I think. Yes and no. I suppose it's as much as you give it, but no, I don't think there is a. We can't say for definite. No, there's some massive, lineage that the Bowron. Not really. Like that would be mainly just for music. Now it can be very, very powerful and whatnot, but no. And even with the drum, like I suppose maybe there are cultures that obviously the drum is absolutely a part of their culture, but I just think it's a bit of be mindful. I think people mean well, and look, fair enough. Some people are ignorant and will just go in blazing and go, "I'm taking that, boom," and I'm, going to use that in my spiritual practice, and then they portray it. And I get that, like, fair enough. That's to be mindful of that and not to appropriate. But then I suppose you can have a lot of gatekeeping as well, maybe, and just to be, I don't know, a little bit of like, let's not be so harsh on people that, I think people are very quick to pick, and especially online, maybe now, even the ones false words you say about maybe your source wasn't absolute, and they're like, that's not true. Actually, and the same with drum. I think we can all say within reason, like drum, like singing. That's like saying, singing is our oldest, one of our oldest forms of prayer. I think drumming, or we would have had some maybe percussion instrument or something, would have caught even with stones, like, you know, it's got to be music has always been a part of people. So I can see why there was some form of a drum, but as you say, maybe just because we don't have direct evidence doesn't mean it's not true or that
oh
you
yeah.
can't use it.
Yeah, that reminds me. I hosted an event about probably about a month ago now, called Awen Calls. Awen, I believe, is like the same as your Imbath. And some folk um singers came along, and they tried to recreate something that we've got in our bardic tales. I can't remember what the name of it was, but it said that we would use a staff and we'd bang it, and then we'd share the poetry over it, like, quite
Hmm.
and they tried to recreate it. They were like, we don't really know if this,
Hey.
but we're trying to bring it through. And I thought that was really interesting.
And again, I suppose it's like everything else, it's your intention and maybe the spirit you're going with it. They're going with again, maybe honesty of, look, we don't really know. We're trying something new here, but we're doing it with a bit of honor to what we may think it is like. And I think that's absolutely, perfect. I think maybe I don't know, maybe scholars or whatnot that are very literal or have to be factual would say, oh no, no, that's not like, yeah, I think there's absolutely not wrong. And that again, like that, in terms of more connecting to spirit, why not be able to get, you know, how do we know if there's only if books and our sources are the only way? Another source can be, that direct source from land or spirit. Maybe you got a message of, as I was saying, my teacher, a lot of his ceremonies that we do now, our rituals are direct from I was told that by the mushrooms or the such and such. And now that's become a thing and it's changed over time. But yeah, I
Mm.
think it's our intention, as long as you're going in with in a humble way and not trying to say this is it. As usual, once we're honest about how we've got something, as long as you're not claiming, this is because that is definitely a thing as well. Even in Irish cultures, certain aspects can go, oh, this is thousands of years old. You have it with actually is really interesting with the Ogham. the alphabet and whatnot. And
This gets brought up this on my
there's
podcast so often, so I forget.
there's a lot, and I didn't. There's so much completely made up stuff from that I didn't know about until I actually basically last 5 6 months and been kind of dreaming into made my own cards and whatnot. And I just blew my mind how much was completely made up, and now that's people have gone about 100 miles down the road with that idea, and it's really interesting. That's a nice little example of that never existed until.
When I first found out about that, it was in a book. An American lady had written a book that was called I don't want to shout, I don't want to yeah, I don't want to call it out, but she wrote a book and it was about the Celtic traditions and there was like this table of like these Welsh symbols and
Mm,
that they represent this tree which represents to the
yeah, yeah,
ancient people represented this
yeah, yeah, yeah.
thing
Which
and they
sounds
use
lovely.
it to
It's so
and
juicy. You're like, oh my
it was
God.
really powerful, and it probably is for you, you know, when you've worked with them, and it's
Yeah,
really powerful. But then it reminds us and takes us back to, oh, I've got the power and the connection with the tree, and this ancient
yeah.
connection doesn't quite matter. And like what you were saying with like the prayer and using drum with prayer and language and singing is inherently spiritual anyways, and it's something that we need as a society and a culture to come back around the fire and do that.
Like,
I'm
yeah, anything that helps. Forgot, I think it's as long as it's not the usual, this is the way or this is not the way to do it. It's like, it's nice to have a bit of flexibility with anything. Anytime, any of the rules and implications that closes down, I suppose, spirit doesn't that.
I've
There's
never
not
been
one
closed
way.
down in person. I've only ever been closed down online.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's
I've
usually the
been around
case.
the fire and I met someone he was Irish and he was playing his bodhrán and I was talking to him about this and he was
Hmm.
like, I've been using my wooden spoon for the past 30 years.
Great idea,
So-
actually.
And he was like, this is like my sacred wooden spoon and
Yeah.
like and he was like, you know, and it just so in the moment, like never goes online. He was like, never heard anyone have that complaint or have a conversation like that. And it really reminded me of it's the online world, like it's the
Very true. That is very
intellectual
true.
world, as you've said. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all right, okay. So yeah, thank you so much for chatting to me about all of this. I'd like to now move on to what you're bringing to the Mystic Cave. This podcast is a part of a little series that's going out just before and during the Mystic Cave, which is an online collaboration project where I'm bringing a bunch of wisdom keepers together to have conversations about and teach through workshops, lessons, and other resources to talk about Bealtaine or Bealtaine. Is it Bealtaine? How do you pronounce
We would say Bealtaine. Bealtaine.
Bealtaine?
Bealtaine.
Bealtaine.
Yeah, that's how
Yeah.
we say it. Yeah. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, Bealtaine. So, this mystic cave is the
Mhm.
idea is we're coming into the cave of summer together to realign ourselves with this like the cosmic calendar. So this mystic cave is to come back into it for those of us who are trying to like revive, reclaim, remember these traditions from the Wise Isles, Wales, England, Ireland, Scotland. I've actually got someone joining from the Isle of Man, Jenna. I
Ah, lovely,
think
lovely.
she commented on one of my pages and she just sent me loads of messages on Instagram about why it's called the Isle of Women and this priestess temple and all of this really interesting stuff. So I was like, you know, coming to the Mystic Cave, that's really exciting. Last year I didn't have anyone. It took me ages to find someone from the Isle of Man. I don't know about you, but it's really hard to find people who know about that. Um, yeah, so I'd love to know what you're bringing into the Mystic Cave.
Yeah, so it's kind of a amalgamation of one of my main workshops. It's called decolonisation of the Gaelic mind. So I've kind of made it's a version of that. We're starting to delve a little bit more into Wales and Scotland and England. So yeah, it's kind of I suppose a rough title would be kind of maybe like the decolonisation of the Celtic Isles, and that is really kind of I touched on it already, but kind of starting to explore. It's a lot obviously from the Irish perspective, but then touching on global traditions and from Wales and Scotland of I suppose how we've gotten to this point. Why do we, as I was saying at the start of the podcast, why do we have such issues around our native language and basically all things Irish from our perspective, but even issues with our own in the Welsh psyche and the Scottish psyche and whatnot. So starting to explore that, and that goes through a bit of a history. Basically, I always say we don't want to get lost in history, but also kind of to make sense of where we are at now, like in personal therapy. you don't just to get help with the present moment. You don't just talk about what's going on now. You have to delve a little bit into the past without getting lost in the past and blaming everyone, in the past. So there's a balance there. So same as that, I do. So I kind of go through a little rundown of history in Ireland, and we'll touch on a bit of Scotland and Wales of how we've kind of gotten to this point with basically how our minds and these waves of colonialism and how it's affected us through education, religion, language, and how all these things were starting to be dismantled by. Um, the oppressor and yeah, and then from there we'll kind of it's basically to just I know a lot of people don't understand why, especially in Ireland. It's just this question of why can't I speak Irish or why this, and hopefully after the end of this it starts to make a lot of sense. And then different steps I know I take from the Hawaiian tradition. I got these like 5 steps to decolonialism that it's really nice that they touch on. And we'll do a little bit I might do a little meditation at the end, maybe just to reclaim maybe a part of us, of our native selves that was lost, and to kind of reconnect with that. And I might even touch on a little bit of Sean Nós tradition, of the singing tradition, and how that's one way I found of reconnecting, of really a lovely way of connecting to my culture. And it's in my native language that, I know many people that maybe can't really speak Irish that could learn those songs. And like I'd encourage anyone to ways of reconnecting. That doesn't mean because it's a big deal to go, right, you now have to learn Scots Gaelic or Welsh, and it's like, you dipping and diving in. So like maybe learning a prayer in Welsh
Mm.
or in Irish, or calling the directions in that language, or yeah, learning a song or something. I think that's a lovely way. And again, singing is natural to us, whether you think you're a singer or not. So we'll be touching on all that, but yeah, basically starting to make sense of maybe how our minds are colonized, and then ways to decolonize and yeah, reconnect to maybe yeah, a little bit more of our native of traditions. And
Mm.
yeah, that's kind of it's kind
And
of it.
so,
I'll
yeah,
try and do it all in 90 minutes.
yeah, no, I'm really excited for it. I'm really looking forward to it. Yesterday, I've received people's contributions, and yesterday I
Hmm.
went through Elwyn Witch. Don't know if you know him, the Antlered Crown.
Mm.
And his was really beautiful, and I just feel so blessed to be gathering us all, like, yeah, in this living library, to share with the world. People really find one of the messages I get the most from my audience is, do you have any resources? Do you have a list of resources? Or like, I've struggled for so long to find the right information, or
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot out
and
there.
yeah, there's so much out there, and I really think it's important, especially in the summer, because this is for Bealtaine. Am I pronouncing that right?
Bealtaine.
Bealtaine,
Bealtaine. Yeah, Bealtaine.
Bealtaine,
I
Bealtaine.
know, yeah, but no, yeah, you call it what you call it, though. Like, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's really important, and with the Welsh language and Gaelic, to know how the sounds like originally were said, because they were
Yeah,
oral before. So
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure after doing the Mystic Cave for a few years, I'll have got it down. But it's like learning for me like how to pronounce the Welsh as well, and then like, oh my God.
Mm.
Yeah, so where was it? Yeah, so like it's really important. One of the reasons that I've created the Mystic Cave as well is because going into summer, we want to be on our phones less, and we want to be in nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a time to learn and practice. So rather than having to like try and find all of this information, like having just like a bundle of really good resources to take with you through the summer to guide you, rather than this like dopamine driven culture that is constantly getting us to seek information all the time. Like, the Mystic Cave is like a little basket to take into the summer of like really truly beautiful offerings. And I'm really excited for that to come out. I'm not sure if it's going to have come out by the time we're in this podcast, but if this has been released, but if it has, you can go down into the description and you can find both of our links. But yeah, thank you so much everybody for listening. Thank you for joining. Yeah, and Arwen, Arwen, Arwen.